Indian populations currently are growing like 4% per year, doubling every 20, 30 years. Not enough housing, obviously. You guys were both pioneering something around Indian housing, around entrepreneurship.
Back in the day, we used earthen shelters, and when we were done with it, we moved on to another one. So we're taking variances on it, and we're moving on. Just because it used to be that way, it's this way now, and this is what we're going to do.
What's the most important thing that you can transfer to somebody just watching this video?
This is a game changer for Indian country.
I'm Roger Frall, Executive Director of Flower Hill Institute. I'm honored to be speaking with Tom Rice, Melissa Robinson Henscheid, and Kenny Appleton. They're from the Big Elk Development Company in the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska. We're going to be talking about their groundbreaking work in farm, labor, housing. This team has decades of leading Indian country in housing initiatives, and the first USDA Section 514 and 516 Farm Labor Housing Project. Really excited to hear this conversation as it explores the opportunities, the challenges, successes, and the future of ag, farm, housing. We hope that you will enjoy this session.
Hello, Tom Rice. I'm a developer with Big Elk Development Corporation.
Melissa Robinson Henscheid with Big Elk Development Corporation, and I'm the Executive Director.
Kenny Appleton, I'm the current construction manager for the tribe, but I work closely with Big Elk and all the other entities that are doing any construction for the tribe, Omaha tribe.
What would you say that folks who'd be watching this webinar, what would they gain from watching the webinar? What do you hope that they would gain?
Well, for the last 33 years, I've been working with a nonprofit. I started at a nonprofit, but for the last 33 years, have worked on housing development in Indian country.
Mm-hmm.
And we did several projects. And the one that we're working on right now is called Pejitu Village. It's a 514, 516 USDA funded project for farm labor housing. We're the first in Indian country, so we're looking forward to getting leased up in March.
Well, that's amazing to be the first in Indian country on anything. Over the 33 years, have most of those housing or all of those housing projects been with the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska, or have they been outside of that tribe as well?
Well, I worked outside of Nebraska. I mean, we did some housing in Omaha, and where else did we do? Oh, and also
Council Bluffs. Joplin, Missouri.
Joplin, Missouri.
Santee.
Santee Sioux.
Yeah.
Worked on a Winnebago project. So there's been several. And I was able to, as I worked with HUD back in 1999, I was a community builder and worked with 36 tribes east of the Mississippi. So then I was hired because we did one of the first low-income housing tax credits in Indian country. So then I was really helping them along, with development outside of HUD funding, outside of NAHASDA. And so this has been a great trip for us. And it took some time, but this is my team. So I've known Tom for 33 years and Kenny for 25 years. They've been with me along the way, and Tom was my boss. Now I'm his. And Kenny's been along working on the construction site.
Yeah. Well, fascinating, and what a journey. As you started your journey, did you consider that, when you were a young lady kind of coming up and growing up and going through school and whatnot, at some point in my life I want to manage development of Indian housing? How would you describe your mission in life? Yeah. How did you get here?
The story is when I came back from Wyoming. I went to college in Wyoming. When I came back, Clyde Tyndall Jr. was on the council, and he had asked me, he said, well, you need to go back to college, finish your degree, and so I did, and then I was working in finance. And Clyde and several others had started a reservation-based nonprofit in which he said, well, we're going to hire you. So I said, okay, fine. And at the time, I was making $8 an hour, and he jumped me to $12, so that was great.
Yeah.
Yes, and this was before computers were, even in our offices. However, I was hired to do business development. So I went on with that for about 2 years, I guess, doing business development and helping entrepreneurs. And it was just Tom and I in the office, and Tom said, "Can you call the bank and I need you to work on this housing part?" And I said, "No, I don't want to learn that because you're going to make me do it." And that's exactly what happened.
Did you have a lot of entrepreneurs to work with in those days? I mean, I think, that was probably at a time where, the word entrepreneur and Indians working outside their own tribe and in a more formal way of business development, as I would maybe help define entrepreneurship. But that probably was the first generation of entrepreneurship, wouldn't you say?
Yes, we received we received a grant from the state. And we started working with entrepreneurs, which Kenny's wife was one of them. They had their own business. And Hawate's was the actual first loan I did back in 93, I believe it was. And they're still in business.
So, when you described, when I asked you the question about your mission in life and, did you always imagine yourself being there, you had this overbearing boss that kind of told you to go do these kinds of things,
Absolutely.
Your life probably would have been different. I mean, if you really didn't take, I'm not going to say reluctantly, but, taking on something that was kind of out of your comfort zone. And then, Tom, for you, thinking about Indian housing, Indian populations currently are growing like 4% per year, doubling every, 20, 30 years, growing very, very fast, and not enough housing, obviously. And it would seem like maybe you guys were both pioneering something around Indian housing, around entrepreneurship, and those kinds of things. How would you describe? I mean, I think each region of Indian country has personalities, and each tribe certainly has their own personality, if you will. What was the personality of the Omaha tribe of Nebraska in terms of them moving forward in these kind of like new areas, and how did you get engaged?
Well, it's a great question. I was working as the tribal planner.
Okay.
Melissa has mentioned Clyde Tyndall. You just can't discount the influence that Clyde had over the creation of NED and the creation of this can-do environment, that we could step out and do things that really hadn't yet been done in Indian country. Melissa mentioned us having done the first low-income housing tax credit finance development. We did it with the Enterprise Social Investment Corporation, but we didn't get funded until our third effort with the State Housing Finance Agency. And that was always, there was always Clyde there. His motto was the Nike commercial, just do it. And very sadly we lost Clyde this last year, but he was a huge inspiration. He was the person that secured the seed money from the council. He was on the council at that time, that allowed us to launch this effort. And I'm very, very proud of the work that we did back then. We also did, as far as I know, the first VA loan on trust land for home ownership. And I don't know, how many homes did we finance altogether in Walt Hill on the reservation?
Well, we built, I think it was 15 homes, and then we gave 36 down payment assistance in Walt Hill. And that's when Walt Hill was 80% Caucasian.
Yeah.
And within 2 years, it was 80% Native.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened. But as far as some of the first, but we did the first VA, and we did 5 right off the bat. We kept saying, "What's the problem? Let's just get it done."
Yeah.
And then the other one was we were instrumental in getting the first 202 project in Macy as well. That's a little bit harder, and that's just due to, our demographics is that we only had 3% over the age of 65, and now we have 4% over age of 65. So it's not growing. But back in the day when we first started out, the Bureau of Reclamation stated that at your growth rate, you're going to quadruple by 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe we hit that target.
Yeah, wow. When you start speaking about those elders and at those ages, and you start thinking about the number of youth Can you describe just a little bit about your community in terms of like the cultural heritage, their life ways, connecting it to culture? Can you speak about that from a personal sense or a community sense?
You want to take that?
Because of schools that our forefathers and whatever were sent off to, we've lost a lot of our ways, and it's coming back. And I give that to the Omaha Nation schools. They're the ones that have kind of led the way. They're teaching the language within the school. Kids are coming out with somewhat of the language. The cultural ways that we lost are lost, but we have an inkling of what they were. So we're taking variances on it and we're moving on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so just because it used to be that way, it's this way now, and this is what we're going to do. And I think the youth that are doing that are taking a lot of pride in that. You know, and we've got the cultural ways are somewhat of a hindrance in housing, because we used to be that we used the house till it was done. You know, back in the day, we used adobe huts, or not really adobe, but you know, our earthen shelters, and when we were done with it, we moved on to another one. Some of that culture has stuck through, so our newer style homes, they have that mentality with those homes, and it's kind of hard to get people out of that. We're working our way through that, but it's taken a while. That the home is a throwaway thing, and we don't want that, nor do our people, that I believe, you know. But those people are starting to age out, and the younger people are starting to take some pride in ownership. You know, and the pride in ownership, the way I look at it, is we as a tribe, that tribal housing authority is owned by the tribe. We all own that.
Mm-hmm.
We all own that. That's ours. It's kind of hard to get some people to believe that, you know, but we're getting there.
Okay, if you had to describe, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up the kind of like the life cycle of structures. So I'm a Pueblo Indian, and here in the shadows of Chaco, Mesa Verde, and other, you know, since 800, 1100, AD occupation, and our current plazas have been, you know, in our community since like 50. I can tell you our emergent story, and I can tell you our migration story, and tell you, you know, at different points along the way since beginning of time, or time immemorial, to where we currently are today. Since 1500, you know, in our community we have our ceremonial grounds, our plaza, and then the houses around that have been there since 1500. So it's just different. You know, it's neither here nor there in terms of being judgmental. It's just different that when I hear the term like, you know, life cycle and disposable, and I'm not talking about Omaha, I'm talking about in conventional cities. And,
Sure.
you know, when you see the life cycle of a modern city, and, you know, they say 30 to 50 years, you know, we're going to build these buildings to last for the next 30 to 50 years. And as a Pueblo Indian, I can walk you to Chaco Canyon, and, you know, 800, and the walls are still standing.
Right.
I think some of that maybe has to do with just time, place, and materials, weather, and whatnot. But so when you think about the life cycle, and then you're improving on that now, what's happened in terms of, because we're talking really about cultural life ways and, you know, learning. What happened with the people to start learning that, no, we ought to be more preservation around this housing because it's necessary? I mean, you know, be out on the plains in Nebraska in the middle of winter, the wind blows and it's a little cold, right?
Right.
And a house is a very good thing to have. So
It is.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the big things is, you know, when I was talking, we were a migrant somewhat, up
Yep.
and down the Missouri River.
Okay.
When I say throwaway, we lived in teepees.
Yeah.
You know, and we'd roll them up and move to the next.
Mm.
And we'd farm where we were at, you know, all the way from Sioux Falls to Bellevue, Nebraska, and
Yeah.
all the way out. And that's the way that's where our history was throughout the years. It's still ingrained in some people's, the grandfathers, the grandmothers' brains, that's what we were. So as we're coming down through the, you know, and our kids have become literate through computers, through their phones and whatever, and assimilated, I guess, it's a terrible word, but that's what we've become. And because we have no other way to furnish a home for them than to assimilate. That's what we did. And I think that's probably part of it, is that, 30 years ago you would hear somebody say, "You're from the reservation, there are still teepees there."
Yes.
Yeah.
People didn't know that. They'd drive through a town not realizing it was a reservation because it looked like any other normal town.
Yeah.
Now we're trying to look more normal. We're cleaning up a little bit more.
Mhm.
We're not slapping our pans off by the back door.
Mhm.
I think that's a reservation-wide thing across the nation. People cook with greasy food and slap it on the back door. We quit doing that. And you have to talk to people about that. That's damaging to the home, and there's so many. I feel like I'm downplaying our people, but I'm not. I'm trying to educate the people that are younger to come up and take care of things.
I heard you say something about lost or losing cultural ways, but now when you describe the disposable housing and you relate it to teepee and migration, that's not losing your cultural ways at all. That's actually preserving your cultural ways. To look at housing in that way, it's very cultural. Because I sit on the plane, I get the same question about the teepee, and I come from the Adobe, I come from the Adobe country, and I still get the teepee question all the time. I think that's where the American citizenry, they look at the stereotypical Indian, and there's a horse, a buffalo, and a teepee.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's very interesting in terms of foodstuffs and ceremonial kinds of things. How would you describe, in terms of the Omaha tribe of Nebraska, kind of where you are on that in terms of young people coming on, still preserving ceremonial ways and food stuff?
So I think that's got a huge resurgence in the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah,
Huge.
interesting.
It has.
And I'm going to give that to the school also.
Yeah.
The Omaha Nation School has started a garden. They have a 6-acre garden. I believe they had 2,200 tomato plants last year, 2,600 pepper plants. It's awesome. It's an awesome garden. And they take those, they feed them in school daily. They got, they have salads and greens and whatever and peppers, and they're teaching the kids the Three Sisters concept, the other things like that. That was gone for years. A garden was gone for years. We didn't have gardens on our reservation. They didn't have any place to have one. They have this little 50 by 50 lot where their house is at, that the housing authority says, nope, you can't do that. And they didn't. So now they have this garden. People are starting to work on possible community gardens. We live in the plains and it's cold. High tunnels, which is kind of a unheated greenhouse, but it works and it helps and it gains some temperature. Gives you a month or two on either side of the growing season. And they're popping up. That's a USDA program that's helping with that. And there's quite a few things that are coming around, and that resurgence is real.
Yeah.
Right. That's where, if we can move right into the Pejitu Village project. Pejitu means green in Omaha. And when we're working with anybody on the farm or farm labor housing, and we're talking about people with buffalo, and the school happens to be right, their garden happens to be right next to our new project. And so that will help with either families coming in, and they'll be eligible to move into the farm labor housing, beautiful townhouses, 2 and 3 bedrooms, $675 a month. And once the season's over, a Section 8 voucher kicks in and pays their rent until growing season again. So I think this is a game changer for Indian country. And I said, this is something that it was more of an easier project to work with USDA. It really is. And I said this, and I told my staff and my team, I said, this is a game changer. Now you got people saying, if you want housing, some of the underemployed, well, let's start working on a garden. Let's start doing this. Let's start selling. And that's not only food sovereignty, but that's housing. And we have tried our best, but we lack behind. And I'm not only talking about our Omaha tribe, we're talking about the nation lacks into housing development. Our next project, and I will say this, I want a 5 to 6 bedroom generational housing under farm labor housing. And so we knew a long time ago, 20 years or more, that our grandparents live with us. So we want a generational housing with the grandparent, with the parent, and with the grandchildren. So that's what we're looking for our next project, and hopefully it gets announced pretty soon. And that will be right up the hill from our original Peixe on the Omaha Reservation.
When you really think about this fascinating intersection of ag
Exactly.
and housing, what percent, just guess, to any one of you three, what percent of Indian country do you think engages in agriculture at very different levels, obviously, but just take a guess. What percent of 577 federally recognized Indian tribes geographically spread across 33 states, and a handful of 40 or 50 unrecognized or state-recognized tribes, non-federally recognized tribes. What percent do you think are ag-centric or ag-related? Just guess.
I would say 25 to 30%.
Yeah, that's significant.
That is
And-
very significant.
Yeah. And then of those, 100% of the 570 are housing related, right? I mean, and with that 4% population rate, there's not enough housing all across Indian country. I don't care if you're the most, progressive and sophisticated and the most resourceful gaming tribe or, what have you. I mean, housing is a challenge, if not a true problem, all across Indian country. But this very unique space of agriculture and housing, that intersection, is anybody else doing what the Omaha tribe of Nebraska is doing? Not as a prideful, boastful point, but just looking at your track record and the kinds of things you've done, in layering various levels of funding and financing, and really paying attention to ag.
This is the first.
Okay.
But I will say that, as far as the low-income housing tax credits, there's a number of tribes that went that route. That is a very tough program, And then the 202s, I know that I believe Wind River has a 202. I don't know how many others. But all of the avenues that we had tried to go for, we believe we would like to teach those with the farm labor housing, because it took us a while to pull the application together. It took us a while to work with our local USDA state office, in which, in fact, when I delivered the application, the USDA national office already knew there was one coming from Indian country. Very interesting. I get a call from the gal, and she said, "Did you put your application in?" I said, "Yes, I got it there." And then so she goes, "Well, we didn't get it. National office did not get it." The state of Nebraska did not know they had a time frame. And so she got on her computer and she opened it up nationwide and said, "We're taking this application for 7 more days." And then she called the state and said, "Get the application in."
Yeah, got it.
So, yeah. And that, the nice story about that is, when we first started, that was in it was actually early 2020, and that's when COVID came through, and our budget went from $3 million to $8.2 million. And so then I went back to DC, and I went to visit the USDA office, the gal there, Miradna Bible Reyes. So I went into, to me, I felt like it was a dungeon in the
down in the basement.
Down in the
somewhere.
basement in a little bitty office. And I went to meet with her, and I said, "From the state of Nebraska." And she said, "Oh yeah, I love Nebraska." She said, "I did the first VA loan there on trust land." And she goes, "Oh, I have a picture." And she grabbed her monitor and turned it around, and she said, "There I am right there, and there's the Secretary of VA." And I said, "And there I am over here." I said, 40 pounds ago. So she came from the VA to work with USDA. And so, and I always come back to relationships and networking. And then we don't all have to, pave that new path. There's people out there that everybody can give a call, and people out there to help. And USDA, I love USDA programs. I mean, when we did our home ownership down payment assistance, USDA was, my go-to. and I knew every program. So
Mm-hmm. You know, Melissa, you talk about 202 and low-income tax credits, and as a pioneer, pioneering on behalf of not just the Omaha, Nebraska tribe, but all of Indian country, and the way you describe, oh yeah, we can help Indian country like this. Yeah, we want to teach. We want to teach. You've got enough work to do on your own at the tribe because not everybody is housed adequately, I'm assuming, and so you still have a lot of work to do. But to say, no, we want to teach the rest of Indian country.
right.
That takes time. It takes energy. It takes a process. It takes resources. What is it, do you think, about us Indians and us tribes who are carrying this, we're moving pickup camp, TP, Travel Ace, Buffalo going that way, let's go. But then you stop along the way, you say, no, we want to teach because others are hungry and others need to hunt and gather. And, so what do you think it is about us that that is so ingrained? It's part of our DNA, wouldn't you think? I mean,
Right.
I think it's that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I mean, how would you
I-
personally respond to, what is it about you, not Nebraska, not the tribe, about you that
About
says,
me?
what about you that says, I want to teach? It's like, no, you've got a job, you got a lot you're working on. Do you have time to teach?
Yeah, I love natives, and I always say
Wow.
I love natives, and our battle here,
Mhm.
and it feels like you battle a lot. And
Mhm.
I will say it hasn't been easy to work with the state, and especially being a nonprofit, and trying to go after their funding. Where they'll say, "Well, my goodness, you received NAHASA funds. NAHASA funds is not enough." You
yeah.
you got to springboard, and you got to. I had one project in Santee. I swear, I think we had 10 different funding sources in there, and it's not pretty. I'm telling you, it's not pretty to have 10 because
Yeah.
that's 10 reports.
Well, and do it different times, and
Right. But we were able to pull everything that we had learned and we can go after, and we pulled it into this one project called His Red Nation. Beautiful project, and with that, it was there were 4-bedroom, 2-bath, full basement, 2-car garage. And as I pulled everything together, the executive director said, and by the way, the maximum mortgage has to be $218. And I said, 218? And I said, okay, well, you're going to have to leave a huge second mortgage into this project. And we got it done. That was 20 years ago. And have I replicated it? No.
Why haven't you?
I just wanted to add that when Melissa was at Mercy Housing, which was when the HOSDA Act was passed, Fannie Mae put some money up for technical assistance for tribes. And so we completed an application that was awarded. And I think you worked with all the tribes in Nebraska in terms of teaching and how these projects might come together.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, we reached out, and in fact, what we did was we went to the state and requested from them assistance, and we received. They were open to giving $40,000 a year to help with reservation-based nonprofits. That's the key. Is you get a reservation-based nonprofit, state incorporated. And it kind of took away the politics, so we can just cut right to the chase and start looking for funding. And especially as a nonprofit, we were able to tap in to the financing that's out there, and it made it so much easier. And at that time, it just takes time to write the grants and get them funded. And
Why do you need to form a not-for-profit? To get around politics?
Seems everybody's looking at me. So we tend to have people that are elected that don't have a professional background to do these types of things. And so when you have to stop and explain to 7 individuals, 7 different times, what you're doing, you've lost your momentum. And it's not that they're necessarily against it, it's just that they don't understand, and they're not required to. We are. So when we take it as a separate entity and they give us the ability to run with things and then just give them big snippets of information, here's where we stand. I think that makes it a lot easier and better because it doesn't slow down the flow or the momentum that you get when you're trying to do something. Because if you have to try and get a Tuesday and Thursday meeting and you have to make sure that you get a quorum to get it done, they also understand that that doesn't work for business, and that's what when you get the separate entity, it becomes more. It's in our best interest to do it that way, and I think it's within, because one's a government entity. That's what the tribal council is. They're a government entity. We're a business entity. Although it's a nonprofit, we're business. Those two need to be separated because one's snap decisions, one's not.
Yeah.
There are a few tribes that have the enterprise board, and they can have a nonprofit if they have all of their codes in place. I do not know which ones do, but that is an avenue. So it's not just strictly that you have to be an outside, and
Yeah.
but that's.
But I think under that scenario, oftentimes that entity's audit is going to roll up into the larger tribal audit. And one of the things that I think, one of the arguments for having a 501c3 corporation is that you're not going to have to carry the weight or burden of maybe the tribe's audits that haven't been very good now for a long time, or the housing authority audits that haven't been very good. And, part of the idea of NAHASDA is to, take that public money and leverage up other private money or other resources. And when you start doing that, those entities want to underwrite you. And so they start looking at your performance history. They look at your audit history. And so, if you have a 501c3 in place and you've been earnest and, you got good audits, you're going to be able to better address, the need for housing on the reservation.
Why isn't every tribe doing what the Omaha tribe is doing? I mean, why hasn't this been replicated, and why isn't this used widely? And so go back to Indian gaming. They go back to the early days of Indian gaming. So 75 or so. Seminole. High stakes bingo. 20 years later, Skip Hayward and Mashantucket Pequot tribe. After that, 150 tribal casinos, just like that. I mean, it's just Indian gaming's like, oh wow, okay, I got that. Why is things outside of Indian gaming not transferable, like housing? Like it's we don't desperately need casinos, we desperately need housing. Why is that so much more challenging in terms of transferability?
I think that's an educational component as well.
Okay.
Because when I was working for HUD, the Mashantucket Pequots were in my area, and I went out there, and they were receiving a lot of money, but they were still living in HUD housing. That surprised me.
Yep.
But there are several, not all of the tribes have a huge bag of money, to build housing. So I really can't answer that, but I'm just saying that it's just the process of building and procuring and finding the right individuals. There's a lot to be pulled together. It does take time.
Can it be replicated?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, you said that quick.
I think it's overwhelming to start a nonprofit and get that nonprofit separated in a good enough manner that the council's not dabbling in it.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
No, I don't know what you mean. Does that happen? Councils dabble?
No, they don't if they're watching this. But that's overwhelming. That's just one component to begin with.
Yeah,
then
right.
then what are your goals once you start this nonprofit?
Yeah.
Is it housing? Is it do we get the farm up and running? Do we buy a bunch of buffalo? Do we buy a bunch of cattle? And do we jump into that business? And when we do that, as we're studying it, we do market studies, whatnot. Sometimes it's forgot the labor to do all of that, the do we have the outside sources that we can bring in to do those, the contractors, is there somebody already on the reservation doing this? But it's not tribally related. Can we reach out to them? Can we do this? All of that becomes overwhelming when you start putting it all in. How do we do this? And then you come down to doing a project, which becomes. It took us 5 years on this last project, from the time of our idea until we actually dug the first footings. It was 5 years.
What was happening? What was happening over the 5 years?
COVID happened is a big part of it. We had COVID, and the price of materials went up, and we could have started the project.
Supply chain materials even being available.
We were ready.
cost.
We were ready to go to bid, and COVID happened, and something in our mind said, "Hey, let's hang on a second."
Okay.
3 or 4 projects that were other areas, and I'm not aware of exactly where they were, that got started, and they're incomplete.
Yeah.
They ran out of money and are incomplete. So Melissa goes back, she gets more funding, we revamp, we regroup. Right up till the last day, Tom and I would be talking, and this thing's falling apart. What are we going to do?
What was the story about that?
Well, yeah, I'll tell that story in just a minute, but we have enough experience to know that, persistence is everything. So many of these deals die. Sometimes they die twice, and your job is to resurrect them. And, we have enough experience to know that you can raise the dead,
Yeah.
So thinking about the title commitment was a big piece of this last project, farm worker housing project. And I don't want to make the story too long, but at one point we ended up at the county title office, and we had a conference call, and we had our title company on the call, and we also had the title company underwriters on the call, trying to work our way through, what it would take for them to issue a commitment. And we finally got a commitment, which was a big day, because then we could finally move forward with closing with USDA and start, moving money. It was a big day. Well, when that final closing happened, the title company wouldn't honor their own title commitment. And I'd never seen anything like that. And, I've been involved with lots and lots of projects. I just never heard of anything like that. But then, Kenny had to jump on that and, running around. And like he said, we were worried, oh my God, the thing's died again. But, we got it resurrected. Kenny got it resurrected, and we worked through that issue.
In that title company example you mentioned, what happened?
You have a title commitment. That assumes they're going to issue a title binder and insurance, right? And so we moved the project forward towards closing on that assumption, and then we discovered that that's not correct. I'd never heard of that happening, and fortunately, there was a way forward. Kenny figured it out, and he spent, I guess, the better part of a week running it all down and getting it done. And you might want to talk a little bit about that.
I think one of their big problems is that we had a site that ended up having 9 legal descriptions on it, and one of the legal descriptions had a typo in it. Fixed that, and when we took, and I think in their mind they're thinking they're all separate sites, all scattered, and they're not. They're one site. Once we got them to understand that, I think that was the biggest thing, is that it's all one site. It just happens to be 9 different legal descriptions.
Right.
And once we had the typo fixed and went back, got that done, but it was just a lot of running around, a lot of conversations on the phone, a lot of emails back and forth, and just out of the blue one day they went, "Oh, we can do this."
Yeah.
And I don't know what I did exactly. It was just, okay, cool, we're running with it.
They saw the light.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was literally like that. This woman just goes, "Oh, yeah. We can do that." And
That's
it was,
why.
Because I never really could understand exactly what it was.
it was, a lot of it was just over that typo, and it threw red flags to them. And once we figured that typo out,
Yeah.
and they're not just little southwest quarter to southwest quarter. They're pretty complicated legal descriptions, and we had to go through them line by line. And make sure it was right.
That's when we're talking about legal descriptions on that first one with Lorenzo Stabler in regards to the first VA loan on trust land, they were expecting me to read that. It would have taken us a week for me to read that legal description without fumbling. But yeah, it's huge. But it's a day by day, you know, and we know that we can fix it, even if it was the resolution or doing that refiling.
And that was the same thing. Don't take no for an answer. We're still, you know, we had 99% of this thing ready, and within a week of our closing on it, they're saying we're backing out. Why? Give me an answer. And they're, once you go through all the answers point by point and work through them, I wasn't expecting that. Oh, but I got it. You know, called Tom. I think I was probably yelling. Yeehaw, we got it.
Yeah. And you know, it was pretty limited title insurance at that, because they wouldn't issue title insurance for the full cost of the project, $8.2 million. They weren't going to do that. They were only going to list the 1% USDA loan that was part of that mix, which was about $150,000. That was the only thing they were going to insure. So, and then they didn't even want to do that. So. But that's the nature of this stuff. You know, I said earlier is that deals sort of have to die once or twice and be resurrected from the dead. And perseverance is everything.
Yeah.
And thank you, Kenny, for your perseverance on that, because you got it done.
Yeah. That is.
Yeah.
You know, I'm drawing this picture in my mind, and you're mentioning things like state, county, Fed. I'm an Indian. I'm sovereign.
Right.
I don't want the state, I don't want the Fed, I don't want the county, I don't want a title company telling me what we can and can't do or how to do it, when to do it. You know, so I've got this thing in my head about the Omaha tribe of Nebraska, its culture, and then the community, the government, you know, the governance of that. Below that is this 501c3, and you've got to communicate with all three of those, the culture, the tribe itself, and the community members, financial literacy. You're bringing the council along. The council didn't, I'm assuming that the council didn't once say, sure, go ahead, go forward and, you know, prosper. That there's some communication, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes it doesn't exist, and other times not so good. And then you've got this ag, then you've got housing. This is a very, very complicated, I mean, people maybe do a drive-by of the housing development, say, oh wow, doing some more housing, without even recognizing the complexity that goes on here. It's very complex, because you said Fed, state, county, and title.
Mm-hmm.
Not where I come from.
Yeah. Well, it is complex, and you know, fortunately, we've all been working in the field some 30 years, and we know it can be done. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think when we looked at when Melissa looked at the USDA project, well, nobody's done it, but we know it can be done. Mm-hmm. You know, you just be persistent, hang in there. And I remember our attorney years ago going down to the State Housing Finance Office in Nebraska and basically pounding on the table. Like, why aren't you going to fund this tax credit allocation? You know, then when it was third time around, we finally got it. And somewhere in all of this is the spirit of Clyde. You know?
Yeah, I've heard
I
that.
mean, he taught me some real lessons early on. And,
Well, I think it goes back to that power of one. I mean, Clyde Tyndall Jr., you know, we all maybe aspire to have his tenacity, perseverance, stubbornness to not take no and just keep moving forward. Look at the community, look at the kids, you know, on behalf of them. Needs to happen. It seemed like you were all three impressed by him one way or another, sounds like.
Yeah. Clyde is my my daughter's godfather. So he would call the house, and she goes, "It's the godfather." But
He wasn't wrong, right?
He was one of the most, you know, brilliant grant writers, you know, and he would pull everybody together, and as he said, you know, it was persistence. But at the end of the day, you know, when we say we're sovereign, we're this, we're that, we don't have enough money to build homes. And we did take a jog with the home ownership, and we got another project with home ownership. It is going to take the education component yet. It is going to take people to understand their credit scores. it is not someone that's just going to be pick who's related to who, and we'll get down that path. And I remember back in the day, in the early 2000s, and some people said home ownership may not be the answer. So then everybody started looking back at the rental process, and now we're back to home ownership may be the answer, but that comes with a lot of components that, the families have to realize that they can't pick up their phone to ask for a new furnace from the housing authority because they owned a home. So there's just a lot to take a look at. But again, we need assistance, financial assistance, and to get more housing out there for our families. It's nice, and I always said, that it would be nice for every child to have their own bedroom at least once. But we have several homes then, what we talked about, that live in basements and they have blanket rooms.
Blanket rooms, what's that? I'm not familiar with the term.
It's a term we coined. We say we have a 5-bedroom house, but
Okay.
there's 15 people living in it.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with that.
So they go downstairs and they create their own room. They'll stick a blanket up.
Ah, got it. Across the door.
Not even the door.
Oh.
It might just be a wide open
Rafters.
basement.
Got it.
Hang it from the rafters.
Got it.
There could be 4 rooms
Yep.
down there. And
In there, they'll put, next to the water heater, next to the furnace, they'll put a TV up. And
Got
they'll
it.
put a bed and a
Yep.
couch,
Understand.
a little small refrigerator and
Yep.
stuff. Because that's all we have.
Right.
That's all we have. That's how the family copes.
Mm-hmm.
They live in there. That's their home. That's their full home. They don't go upstairs and eat dinner because mom and dad and grandma and grandpa are up there. The house is too busy, so they stay in their own little room, which tells us that, and we sit and we say that we could viably man up 400 to 500 houses, and we could. But we've got to come up with the funding sources and the ability to get there. And this is
Right.
just a start, and my dream is at some point to make the housing authority irrelevant. Everybody owns their own home. Everybody owns their own little piece of the pie. And it can be done, and it's the rising tide raises all ships. We got to get to that point. Some of it is, or it's above the housing issue, and it's probably ag-related. That's how we create jobs for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren.
yeah.
Is probably ag-related. That's what we have. We have land. We have ag land. We're in God's country. We can grow corn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We can grow beans. And we can grow with the best of them in the world. But we've got to be the ones doing it.
I struggle with this myself sometimes because as an Indigenous person sitting on the plane, having the conversation with the guy across the aisle from me talking about my teepee and my buffalo and my horse. And when we started this conversation, we started talking about culture. We started talking about the disposable house because of our teepee kind of lineage and kind of tradition. Where was the blanket house in those days? We don't have a blanket house in Chaco, right? I don't see the remnants of the blankets. I can see the remnants of the stone and the adobe and the. But it seems like our evolving cultures are, while we say we take care of our elders, my grandma's not going to be in some green-walled institution. She's going to
Right.
be living with me, and my grandmother did, by the way. But yet there's this tension of modern Indians in this modern world saying, no, I do need a little privacy. I've got the clicker to the TV. I run the roost, right? I'm the one who decides what channel we're all going to be watching or listening to. So what is it, do you think, about us that says now we need to have privacy, we need to have some autonomy, but yet we all say, and we do function in multi-generational housing. I wonder where we all kind of got off track a little bit in terms of, no, we don't need a blanket. I don't want to be invisible. I don't want you to be behind a curtain. I want you to be with us, grandma, uncle, auntie, nephew, niece, etc.
No
Right,
TVs back then.
Yeah. something happened, right? I mean, wouldn't you agree that there is something that has happened or happening, maybe?
Right. I remember being even younger, and I remember the first time my dad, the first memory, my dad turning on the radio, and I was like, wow, the music.
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit further. My great-grandfather owned, they were tar paper shacks. This is prior to the housing coming in 1968. In the early 60s, they were dirt floor.
Yeah.
People swept those floors.
Yeah.
They swept them,
Right.
and they were blue
Yeah.
from all the traffic.
Uh-huh.
But they took pride in that little $5 a month shack.
Uh-huh.
That was theirs. Somewhere between that point and HUD housing probably caused us some grief, a lot of grief, actually. The rules and regulations that go along with HUD that the 1937 Act created before NAHASDA that didn't let us. I think that 20-year period there probably caused a lot of that. Because 80% of our housing in Macy is HUD housing.
I grew up in a two-room adobe house my father built, and we had to go to the outhouse for, plumbing.
Yeah.
And because lack of plumbing, and I remember growing up that way, and never felt like I was poor, never felt like I didn't have, never felt I was less than, because everybody in my community was growing up exactly the same way.
Right.
And I raised my 4 kids in that same house.
Wow.
Of course, they're not living that way right now. I'm not living that way right now. But it's just amazing, like in not a generation, in one person in my lifetime, my life experiences I was raised that way without embarrassment. I raised my kids kind of that way. We actually installed cement floor and plumbing in the house by then with my kids. But yeah, it's interesting how fast time goes by and the evolution of one man and one experience in one life,
Well, how many people have you had when you tell that story? Look at you like you're a liar, because I was 14 before we got running water in my home. This was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And people look at me, you're lying. I wasn't the only one. All my neighbors were the same.
Yeah.
And like you say, there was no shame in it because everybody was in that same situation.
Right.
And when you tell people that, they look at you like, are you from a third world country? Well, we aren't. We're just different.
I don't know what the third world would be. I think it's a different world, and very prideful and very happy to say, we're not better, we're not worse, we're different.
And
And I think that really kind of summarizes my vantage point, at least of Indian country.
and
Very
like you say, my dad, who's 83, he still lives in that same house. He has plumbing now too.
Yeah.
But it was, he never moved. He was literally born in that house upstairs.
Yeah.
He knows where it's at, and we've told him, Dad, you should retire and move off. He said, nah. When I feel like it's time to die, he said, I know about where I was born. I'm going to go lay down up there, and that's where I'm going to die. And he honestly, I think he's going to do that.
Yeah, right.
Well, so I was 2, I believe, but when they started building houses in Macy, the first project that came, the HUD house came, it was 1966. No, I wasn't 2. I wasn't even born.
I was alive.
You were
Yeah,
born,
yeah.
but when they first started everything,
Yeah.
and but there was no housing there. But I remember us all living in a shack.
Yep.
It was just one kitchen, and then the room, and then a steep stairs upstairs. And we had cousins, we had families. I think there was probably 16 of us living there, and I remember looking at the old pictures, and they were all outside. They had a picnic table, and I was saying, God, every picture we have, everybody's outside. And they was like, well, nobody fit inside the house. That's why.
He went in there to sleep.
They
Yeah,
went in
right.
to sleep.
Yeah. That
But
was the bedroom.
They
Yeah.
looked happy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Wow. Cooking outside.
Yeah.
Outside, no
Yep.
running water.
Well, the food
and
tastes better outside.
Right.
It does.
Smoke.
Yep.
I think that leads back to my stance that HUD ruined reservations. I really do feel that, honestly.
I wanted to make sure that we connected as spiritual beings sharing this human existence and really connect in a human way. Let's say you said you wanted to teach. Here we are on a webinar and you're able to teach. So can you talk a little bit about some of the, not the tangible work quite yet, but the communication piece, the kind of wrestling with the council and having them agree that having a hands-off, 501c3 in their community is a very good thing, and then really allowing that to happen. Because not every tribe has the maturity to allow that to happen, even though they agree with it. It's another thing to actually do it. But talk about maybe a little bit about financial literacy in your community. About, we got to have a funded financing project, and there might be some homeowner experiences that are required in that. And how do you lift up, as Kenny was saying, raise the tide and all the ships rise, so how do we work in your community, kind of the software of the discussion, and then let's quickly go to then, I want to know about your projects, I want to know about your policy, your, financing, funding, pre-construction, ultimately into construction and then turning it over to home ownership, those kinds of things. But can you talk a little bit about the intangible pieces that are communication and teaching in your community? I mean, it seemed like that would be like a big part of your work and life that you can't see it.
Right.
There's not a house there. There's not a foundation. There's no 2x4s. But it is incredibly hard work, and it takes a lot of time. And you can't put that on the federal grant or,
Right.
I mean, how do you account for that?
Right. I mean, for myself, when I came back from Wyoming, I got a call and someone said, "Can you come into the business class and speak to the junior high?" I said, "Sure." And so I was speaking to them and I was explaining to them about education and about just learning. And I said, "You're young, but I've seen a lot of people that have started young in businesses and, again, being entrepreneurs." And I said, "But just remember that, whatever you're going to do, take a look at your future as well." I said, "Because at some time and point, you will be off on your own." And I see now, now I can see where there are so many middle 20s individuals, and they're not out there helping or providing, but it's hard. It is hard work. I mean, you got to get up in the morning, you got to put your shoes on, and you got to try to provide. And sometimes it is hard, but every chance that I got is a teachable moment. I mean, it may be one person. It may be. We started going into the schools and talking to them, and we had to, with one of our grants, we had to get a voice from the children, from the elders, from the community. And so we started talking to them about that. And we went to the 8th grade class last year, and they were like, "Well, what does the class want to see for the community?" And they took a little survey and they said housing. I mean, even in 8th grade, they said we need housing. And so we went from that to saying, "You know what, Kenny?" I said, "We're starting up." Kenny and Tom, we're starting up with Page G2, we got to get it done. So to me, it was like riding on our shoulders about the children, and that's where it starts, And I say, dream big, We did a youth build project during COVID. That was hard. Not hard, but hard. It's the way you take a look at it, I guess. And it's tiny cabins, which we still have yet to really get done.
Got to finish, but
Yeah, but it was a tiny cabins, and we and then the children there, or the kids there, went through the college and got certified. So it was a teaching there to come back, and then they could see how tough it is to try to fix the wiring, drywall, whatever. They learned how to do that. But it's for them to see outside of that. I don't want to say that everybody has to move off the reservation or take a look off the reservation, but I do believe the educating is the tool. But even the project that we had up in Santee, we took the home buyers and we showed them where to change out the filters. back at home at HUD, the HUD housing, I mean, they'll call. I mean, that could be one big plugged, air filter, but they would give them the air filter and they wouldn't even change it out, just that, to help themselves. So
Teach me how to fish instead of give me fish.
Right. When I first came back, on my board, on my whiteboard, I put in big letters, "Help me, help you." That's what it came down to.
Well, it became to the point, and different people running the place. We were gone for a little bit, come back, Melissa and I. During that time period, if somebody wasn't paying their rent, they didn't get any services. Well, as
They weren't evicted from their house either, though?
No.
Okay.
But there's, so you go in their house and the water's running, there's a hole in the floor or whatever,
Right.
but they wouldn't get any services. Their stove doesn't work, so they're
Yep.
using their microwave.
Yep.
My stance was, I don't care if that person's, I'm going to take care of the house.
Yeah.
That's my job, is to take care of the house. Somebody in that back room over there needs to go talk to these people about paying their rent. That's not my job.
Yeah. Right.
And what they would do is they'd send a certified letter, and I think they're still doing that to this day. It's not right. As a human being, you need to go sit down. This person didn't pay the rent the first month. You grab a cup of coffee, you go sit at their table with them and say, "Hey, what's going on? Can I help you with something?" The next month they don't pay the rent. You go back here a little more stern. Say, "Hey, I just had this talk with you. You didn't follow through. If I have to come back again, you're going to be evicted." And then you have to get the council and you have to get the housing board to agree with you that that's what we're going to do.
Have they done that?
They have not. And partially because we both moved on, maybe, I don't know. We never got those instilled into the things. But to be able to save some of our stuff, we have, you have to lose a few once in a while. There's going to be those bad actors that won't pay rent. There's going to be those people that don't take care of things and ruin them on purpose sometimes. For the greater good, you got to take care of some of, the other 262 that are behaving. Let's help them. But I still, my stance was, I got to take care of the home first. These people, the people that's their job, to taking care of people, need to step up a little bit also.
Right.
But they weren't because the technical assistants from HUD didn't tell them that you have to do that. You just got to go do an inspection once a year. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And when the HOSDA came in, we didn't change so much from the 37 Act in the HOSDA. We didn't take control of it. And we still haven't to this day. 1997, is that when the HOSDA came in?
96, yep.
We've had all these years, nearly 30 years to change it, and we haven't. We still operate under 37 Act rules and regulations. And I think a lot of tribes do, but I know for a fact we do. We're cutting our own throat when we do that. We need to take control of it, and we haven't.
Why haven't you? I mean, what's the next step? Is it a quantum leap? Is it just the next step?
It's not even really a quantum leap, I don't think.
Okay.
It's just a matter of taking the rules and regulations from this to this.
Yeah.
And what happens is we get an audit, we get findings. Those findings are our own rules that we've broken.
Right.
We need to quit that.
Yeah.
638 in our tribal program, same thing. We're following those federal rules yet. We haven't grabbed it and said, this is ours. This is all we need for rules.
Okay, so fast forward. We did it. All right, we're there. We've already done that. We did exactly what you just suggested.
Follow the
What
policy.
happened? Okay, yeah. So what happens? I mean, what's the benefit for following the policy and kind of getting into that risky area of following the policy?
Well, I think
what do we get? What's the return on the investment?
So the
for doing
return on
that?
the investment is 20 years of bad audits.
Okay.
We have that history within the
Yep.
housing authority and within the tribe.
Okay.
We start getting good audits. Those good audits lead us to access to funding better because we don't then have to go out to the nonprofit. The tribe can go out after some money.
Yeah.
The tribe does a little, the nonprofit does a little, the housing authority does a little. Everybody together rises the tide.
Got it. I understand.
Right now the tribe has bad audits. The housing authority, they can't write grants.
Yeah.
They don't have access to money.
I think part of the HOSDA was to take the annual housing allocations and free it up some that it could leverage up other money, right?
Right.
But then to leverage up that other money, you got to have a good HUD annual performance review, and you got to have a good audit, and that's how people underwrite organizations. So, getting that piece done is essential. or you can kind of create a 501c3 and not have to carry that history of bad audits. I think Ned always had great audits. You know, I don't think we ever had any audit findings. So, you know, that's
Most of our bad audits come from procurement.
yeah.
Our procurement, we created those rules. Why do we keep those rules in place when we know year after year after year that they're going to give us a ding on an audit for this? Use the Federal Acquisition Regulation. That's all you're required to have. Use that thing. Don't put any extra rules and regulations on it and move on. And you know, I don't know how many other tribes have that problem. We do, and we have a history of it.
Yeah.
I think, you know, for the most part with the housing authorities, it's that there is such a turnover in directors, and the turnover in directors basically is every 2 years. And HUD doesn't step in quickly. To me, HUD doesn't step in quickly enough to train the new directors. So,
So Clyde inspired you. You're inspiring others. Are there more young people behind you? Champions, you know, capable folks that are next gen are going to take this and stand on your shoulders and jump and change policy and follow in it here and go back to FARs and, you know, et cetera. Do you see that happening? The next gen coming behind you?
yeah, we should start an academy. Tom,
You know,
that's a great idea.
we'll teach persistence.
Yeah.
and more persistence.
Yeah.
Because Grow
Yeah.
America, what was Grow America before that? The
National Development Council.
The National Development Council. You sent me to training
Yeah.
twice there.
Yeah.
Then you got me trained on the low-income house tax credits, and then we did some of the training with them.
Yeah. All
And
right.
now they're part of being the SSBCI that we're
Yeah.
working with.
Yeah, was really gratifying after all these years to be re-engaging the National Development Council, which is now Grow America, because we did get an SSBCI capital allocation. The tribe did, and Big Elk is running that for the tribe. We got 1.5 million, and that has to be leveraged up on a one-to-one participating loan basis. So we're going to be closing, hopefully, on May 1, our first $800,000 loan, $400,000 from SSBCI. And then we have a local lender that we're working with, and the tribe's going to be purchasing 8 spigots to help irrigate its ag land. So I don't know why I wandered off into that, but that's something else that we've been working on and doing. So, you know, we'll teach people how to do that too.
Right.
But I think that's an opening for, I guess entrepreneurs maybe not be the right word.
Yeah.
But if somebody's interested in farming, they take their little garden and turn it into a farm market or whatever, farmer's market or whatever.
Yeah.
There's access to money there.
There is. Grow America is going to be doing our entrepreneurial training. So we have that set up for people that have businesses that, you know, construction businesses, but maybe they don't have a banking relationship, and, you know, they can't really bid on something that they could do because, you know, they don't have a line of credit. So, you know, trying to position, you know, small businesses vis-a-vis banks and understanding how the banks are going to underwrite, you know, their credits, make credit decisions. We've got that, you know, in place, and hopefully it's going to be rolling out here soon. So,
What I would like to do is challenge that the tribes that are interested in doing a farm labor housing to do a site selection. And then when we were talking about farm labor housing, if it gets announced, it's a $5 million, basically a $5 million budget, and work yourself downwards.
Okay.
But the hardest thing, again, with a lot of the times that we were doing development, it took a long time for the tribe to decide on the site selection. And the farm labor housing was one of them, and I knew that we had access to fee simple land that under 10 LB 1087, I believe, it was tax exemptable. It was on fee simple land, but in our area. So we went that way. I think that was a little bit easier than the trust, because trust land takes forever. But
yeah.
but
What
it's
is
the
the
site
difference? Talking
selection.
about land, what is the difference of how many acres Omaha Tribe on trust? More or less.
It's about 6,000 acres, and don't completely quote me on this.
Okay.
It's rough, and that's trust.
Okay. Be
And
simple.
1,600 acres.
Okay. And units. How many units have you guys successfully built?
Wow. I guess I never really sat down and,
At least several hundred.
yeah.
Wow, several hundred.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
on the multifamily side, and then single family.
Yeah.
Okay. How many acres of farmland? I mean, are you guys affecting on the farm side? That's somebody else's deal.
I'm involved in that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So the on the Iowa side we have about 1,800 or 1,500 acres. On the Nebraska side we have about 1,800 acres
Okay.
of bottomland that's irrigated.
Yep. And what are you guys growing?
Corn and beans.
Got it. Okay.
That's currently leased out to an operator.
Okay.
We have in the last 2 years started, and our farm, it's against the current farm, which is our motto, has about 400 acres that they're farming. Right now it's going to be corn, beans, and alfalfa.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yep. So, and we're hoping to grow that, hoping that this land that we have rented out becomes our farm's land. To
How about
use.
ranch and range?
Wait, can I correct you? Against the current farm. You said against the farm.
Did I?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's against, the current.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about ranch and range?
Not much.
Okay.
Not much.
You guys, buffalo and
We
short
have
bison back.
we have some buffalo, about
Yeah.
24,
Okay.
and they're pretty much just to look at.
Yeah. Okay. And entrepreneurs. How would you account for entrepreneurs?
Well,
And just in terms of numbers.
I couldn't even gauge
It's probably a
that.
handful.
Okay.
A handful.
Well, I think it's a few more than that. When we put together the SSBCI technical assistance application, we did a kind of a market study, and we identified about 14 tribally owned businesses. Now, some of these are on the reservation, and some of these are in communities near and adjacent to the reservation. But we've identified about 14 that we thought would qualify for sort of entrepreneurial training, where they had been in business for at least a couple years and kind of understood what they were getting into. So I'd say about 14.
So to the person watching the webinar, they're going to want to know what kind of enterprises, casinos, retail, manufacturing. What's the tribe doing with its enterprises?
We have 2 stores.
Okay.
We have a Class 2 and a Class 3 game. The Class 3 is in Nebraska, Class 2 is in Iowa,
Mhm.
gaming. That's about it, isn't it? And our farming enterprise.
Yes.
And we have a number of individuals that are doing the same thing that you're doing around this way with their crafts,
Mm-hmm.
and they just sell online,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just they go, yeah. I mean, they
No,
do
no.
beautiful work, but
I've probably discounted a few people that sell food on this.
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Yep.
food sales.
A lot of food sales. People go door to door selling food,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
you discount
That
those
is a
people.
business, and it's a legitimate, brings in money, and it's cultural preservation all at the same time. It's
Yeah.
called cultural foods.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was my first project when I first started in my early 20s. Is that when we got the entrepreneurs in business, I told the tribal I was very young, but I told the tribal council we're going to do powwow loans, and then they were like, "What?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "We're just going to help them. They had to come to class. They had to do a business plan,
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Let's." And so I brought them all together. I said, "How much money does it take to make an Indian taco?" So we went down and we had it all done, and it was $2.19 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I made them do their own business plans, and so I gave them $500 unsecured. Tribal council laughed at me. I said, "Okay," and I told everybody. I said, "Come Sunday morning," I said, "I'm gonna come to your stand, because there's only 10 stands." I said, "I'm gonna come to your stand," and I said, "I want the $500 back plus the
Mhm.
interest of $50."
Mm-hmm.
So I got laughed at, but I had 100% payment.
Well, you and Clyde, the Godfather. You know, it's kind of
The
like-
Godfather.
Clyde, you didn't see Clyde standing
Yeah.
behind you, but he was there.
Back there.
Right. And I thought to myself after a while, I said, how stupid was I walking around and it
Bag
wasn't
of
locked,
money.
a bag of money.
Only in Indian country,
Right.
Melissa. Only in Indian country.
But it got done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so we'll
That's
talk about
crazy.
getting things done. We kind of built up. I really appreciate the conversation, and I feel like I've gotten to know a little bit about the Omaha tribe of Nebraska. Thank you for sharing personally and professionally about your work and whatnot, and some of the opportunity and the challenges. Let's just dive right into projects. How many live projects do you have at any given time? That's going on. And then can you start describing the project and project development, pre-construction, funding, grant writing, execution, et cetera, et cetera. Can you describe kind of your methodology for successful projects? And not every project is, you've got that tenacity and perseverance piece, but, talk about the good projects, like the ones that have kind of like seamlessly moved and, can you describe the elements of the different projects and how they, how do you operationally move those forward?
One of the projects we're working on is the tourism project, and with the ARPA funds that Big Elk received, we have put quite a few dollars into 5 big cabins, so they're going to be unrestricted funds basically to come in back to the tribe. And I've also reached out to other tribes that have tourism, and so we're just starting out on that, but our cabins should be done in, okay,
Month-ish.
all right, give me a date. No, I'm
not
kidding.
gonna give you- I'm not going to give you a set date on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, but we're getting there, and it's gonna be done pretty soon. So I would say within 8 weeks that we hopefully have 100%. And with that, I meant the cabins are large, very large. They're bigger than the.
They're 14 by 52.
Oh,
yeah, they're
so
bigger
this is
than a tiny.
multifamily coming in and.
Well, they're rental property. They're like motels for our hunters.
Okay.
So our park area, which is adjacent to where our buffalo are at, so they can sit on their front porch and look at the buffalo. They're
Yep.
right there.
Okay.
Right next to the river.
We're right next to the river. We have our deer population is kind of down right now, but we have historically dressed out 250, 300-pound deer.
Wow, whitetail?
It's corn-fed, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
So-
that's a big whitetail.
It is. So they're eating corn. People
Yeah.
come from all over the United States to hunt here.
Got it. Okay.
And
That's a tribal enterprise?
it is a tribal enterprise. So our
Okay.
wildlife and parks people,
Uh-huh.
I believe it's $1,000 for an off-reservation tribal permit,
Yeah, wow.
and they're glad to pay that.
Mhm.
They're also going off-reservation, live in motels and stuff. We build our cabins. We're going to capture some of that money within our cabins for the rental that they're going to do, and they'll be there for a weekend, but they're glad to pay $150, $200 a night for the place, and they're happy to do that.
Yep.
And along with that, there's plans that we're probably going to make a little restaurant or something along there because they got to eat.
Mhm.
We haven't gotten to that point yet, but it'll get there. We have RV trails, we have
Right.
horse trails, all within this park. We just got to get people to start coming.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Absolutely. And that kind of ties into the entrepreneur. So if we build a little place to cook, that it may be 5 different cooks or a family that comes in once. Let's say 7 families come in and provide a meal, and that's how they can make some money.
Mhm.
It may not be that same person, because I used to have a restaurant, and boy, that running a restaurant's hard.
Yeah, 70 hours a week, tough work. You've got to
It was
wash
tough.
dishes and take the order and et cetera, et cetera.
And when something
Right.
breaks, you got to fix it.
Yep, exactly, right.
Hope all the employees show up.
Right.
But the
That-
farm worker housing, can you talk about those kinds of projects? And you said, thousands of units. Can you talk
Yeah.
about some of the successful projects there?
I just, I love to say this all the time, and that's that, if you're going to be a professional doing this, you really want to know this year what you're going to be applying for next year, right? If you look at the USDA farm worker housing program, it's a two-part application. And the first part is determining feasibility and are you actually eligible. And you got to do a little work if you're going to get a good, pre-application in. You got to get the kind of standard stuff, an appraisal, a survey, you got environmentals, those types of things, market studies. You're going to have to do a little work. But, you can also, figure out what does USDA want to see? What do they want to see in the final application? What are some of the winning applications? In my life, I've gotten hold of, where funding is competitive, I've gotten hold of winning applications. And so if you know this year what you're going to do next year, you can really help prepare. Right now, we have, you were asking what we're working on right now, but we did get a RAISE transportation planning application funded, and it's 2.2 million. That's the planning phase. Well, we're trying to execute the contract with the engineer as we speak. We have been working on this trip, but if we get that work done, by the end of this year, we'll be in a position to apply for a RAISE capital application, assuming all the money isn't taken away, right? But legislatively, 2026 is supposed to be the last of the RAISE capital application. So anyway, you got a plan, right? You're doing the planning work. You're going to, get all this engineering work done. It's going to roll up into a perfect capital application where what they're looking at. It's going to score really well. So, it's been going on a bit, but knowing this year what you intend to do next year, and especially around the USDA piece. Because it is a two-part application. I think you want to, prepare. So
Site selection.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
start with that,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then go
yeah.
with the environmental.
Right, and if you're going to do it on trust land, there's some complications there because
That's a year.
tribe's going to have a real property ordinance, right? You're going to have a leasehold interest in it. But then, the tribe can appraise that leasehold interest, and they can roll that into the funding. So you got a bit of a tribal match, right? You're showing. So, but all that stuff takes time, and you're not going to do it in a month.
So you got the site selection, you go through the pre-construction, the funding, financing,
Right.
grant, bringing folks along. Tell me about post-construction and the operation side. How do you maintain connectivity to those thousands of units that you've developed? What role do you play? What capacity, capabilities do you have to have in-house to be able to not have that disposable house?
Well, for myself, we were lucky enough 20-something years ago with the 202 project that we reached out to a third-party property management, United Church Homes out of Ohio. And they came in and they took care of this. So that, again, takes the politics away from that, takes the policies. They just follow what is going to be authorized or available, eligible to move into this project. So then I reached out to them and I said, we have another project coming up. And I said, will you be the property manager for that? To make sure, that everybody that's moving in, every household that's moving in is eligible to move in, and they're somehow, some way in the farm ag working. So that's the bottom line to that to keep, and we like to keep the same people working in the property.
Yeah, I'd imagine that keep the same people working. You've over 30 years have built up the usual suspects, the right guys. I'm sure there's a lot of wrong guys out there in terms of subs and partners and funders and architect design, et cetera, et cetera. It would seem like you have a good collection of folks that are trusted and you can operate without a whole lot of question with the folks you have developed a relationship with over.
I think I want to hit on so we have an outside source doing our property management.
Okay.
Takes the politics out of it.
Yeah.
You can't kick my granddaughter out. You can't kick my niece out. It becomes hands off.
Right.
Property management is an ugly business.
Yeah.
It's an ugly business.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want anything to do with it. And I'm in an ugly business, but that's uglier.
Yeah. What's ugly about the business? I don't mean the property management piece. That one. I get.
Construction.
Yeah.
It's-
But tell me about the ugly part about your business.
It's just if everything's going good, it's great.
Yeah.
It's when things go bad.
Okay.
You have to be that person. I have to be that person on site that says, "This is the decision," and if it's good, I take the credit for it. If it's bad, I get the hit for it. You
Yeah.
know, and that's the ugly part of it. And then I have to sit in front of 7 people and say, "Why did you do that?"
Yeah.
You know, and you have to take the blame for it. I have to.
So, for instance, for like what? Like what's the ugly part of?
So somewhere in the plan, somewhere in all the planning stage, something doesn't go right, and the contractor gets there and say, "Hey, this is going to be a $50,000 change order."
Mm-hmm.
I have to be that person to explain that change order or authorize that change order to keep them moving. And sometimes it's just
That was 3 moves before that. It was a design and engineering and architecture
Yep.
piece. Somebody up there didn't do their job.
Somebody didn't do their job,
Yeah.
and when it falls on me, and so I'm going to go backwards. I'm involved in the planning
Yeah, right.
stages, so I was partially at fault because I
Yeah.
didn't catch it.
Okay.
You know, so but I
What's a bad day there in terms of like dollar amount? 50,000?
yeah,
That's a
that
bad
hurts.
day.
It hurts.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It hurts. And then when you sit in front of the 7 people and they're asking the question, well, why didn't you catch us 6 months ago?
Yeah.
You don't
'Cause
have
I'm not
much of
perfect
a,
and the world's not perfect. That's why.
you don't have much of an explanation, and
Yeah.
it does happen. And
Yeah.
when we go out to bid, one of my first things is I stand up in front of everybody and I say, I hate change orders, because I do.
Yeah.
You need to look at this project, you need to look at all the plans, you need to look at all the specifications, and you need to build into your price any possibilities that when we get to this $50,000, you've already got it built in.
Yeah.
You've caught it, you've seen it.
Is that plus or minus 10% piece? Is that
Sometimes, yeah,
Contingency.
yeah, contingency, and you need to build
Yeah.
that in, and it's
how often does that happen?
more often than people think.
Wow.
Throughout a project, you're going to have this $8 million project. We're already to 10 change orders. Some of them are small.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you know, depending on the mix of financing, there are some strategies to sort of overcome that. If you're doing like a pure tax credit project, you know, with subsidized money, home dollars,
Mhm.
AHP funds, et cetera, in most states, you know, you do have the liberty to select your general contractor based on qualifications, the same way
Right.
that you select an architect. And that really helps because general contractors know more about what something costs, almost always, than architects. So if you have them in the room talking with one another while they're putting together these plans, you know, hopefully you don't end up in a situation, you know, where, well, there's this major, you know, change order because the architect or engineer screwed up. You know, it's, you know, more communication the better, but sometimes you end up with a mix of financing where they're just going to insist that there be a separation and that things be separately bidded.
The fixed firm price
Yeah.
contract,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of becoming
Right.
a thing of the past.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now we're kind of swinging towards design build projects. So
Mhm.
the architect and engineer are one.
Yep.
They're partnered,
Yep.
and it's where Tom was saying. You know,
Yeah.
that takes away a lot of the change order things, because then it becomes owner instigated change orders, not something that
Yeah.
they come to me for. And if
Yeah.
it's owner instigated, then it's on us,
Mhm.
and we know that going into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, things you learn with experience. We had a few contractors we worked with that screwed some things up. I remember one single-family home we built, and you know, the basement wasn't exactly square. You know, it was like 4 or 5 inches out of alignment. But we did manage to redesign the house with an overhang, right? The front of the house bumped it out like 18 inches, and so you didn't know.
Nice.
Because that's an expensive thing to tear out a basement, you know.
I believe that's Brad's house, my brother's house.
Oh, I remember losing some sleep over that.
Well, that was, I don't know if that was the same one, but, you know, when we were first into this, we took a look at every possible product out there. You know, people are calling you, and so we went with Lightform, remember?
Mm-hmm.
That's the house next to Brad's. But the Lightform guy, the contractor came and he poured, but then he thought he was going to save money, so he was cutting off the Lightform that's supposed to be the insulation.
Yeah.
We come into town, and it's all
Stripped
over,
it.
all over the ground.
Mm.
And, yeah.
But he did a fine job of pouring it. You're not supposed to strip it. It's supposed to stay.
Mm-hmm.
You got to account for the 2 inches. And he didn't.
Mm. Is there any specific project where, boy, we sure wasn't made successful, but we sure learned a lot, and then that learning a lot was successful moving forward to other projects?
We've learned.
I think
Yeah.
I think Heritage Hills was a big learning experience.
Oh, what's that one?
So Melissa and I did it was a full-fledged tax credit project.
Okay.
18 years ago.
Okay.
I don't remember what it was, $3 million?
No, it was actually only 1.6.
18 homes. We did 18 homes with $1.6 million. We went to the Nebraska State Prison. They had a project going on where the people that were within 6 months of parole or getting released were able to work on houses, and they were 24 by 48, I believe. We bought them from them, and we moved the houses complete from Lincoln to Omaha, Nebraska, or to the Omaha tribe, 90-some miles. Set them on foundations that we had placed and whatnot. It was easy enough to get the grant, but the structure afterwards, even as we're building it, the drawdowns were rough, and realistically it caused Melissa and I to take about a 2-year break, 3-year break. I walked away. I was so stressed. I hated construction for a minute.
It
Yeah.
was very political. It was very political, and so I said, Kenny, at the end of the day, we're bidding this out, but they want a Native American group to bid on it. And I said, I don't know. I wasn't comfortable with that. They were new. And so, what's the story, Kenny?
Didn't quite finish. But anyway, about 6 weeks from the end of the project, we got to be leased up. September 1, October 1, something.
No,
like
it was December 31st.
we weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a crew hired of about 18 people. And one day, 2 little groups out of those 18 people we made into contractors fired the rest because we were not going to make it.
Right.
And we did with these contractors. 95% complete. We weren't 100% complete. And wasn't asked to walk away, but it was time.
Yeah.
It was time to walk away. It was probably the most stressful project I was ever on.
Mm-hmm.
Tom started talking about tax credits, which new market tax credits are a different deal.
Yeah.
I started going, oh no, I need to retire.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a worthy project, and they're nice homes. It was worth it. The stress that was related with getting the project done was overwhelming. It was overwhelming.
Yeah, it was very overwhelming. It was.
And she was dealing with the lender or with
Mhm.
the people, but stress was rolling downhill to me.
Right.
And I'm putting
Right.
the pressure on the crew, and the
Yep.
crew's revolting, and
Right.
and it was
That when you're leasing up and people see a new structure going, and then you have income limits, and I mean with low-income housing tax credits, as you can't even get into the realm of getting a set aside, with it having been 60%. I mean, you really are drawn to looking at just getting houses up. So, and I've seen one project up in Wisconsin that the developer that came from out of town, he had them at 40%, and I was like, 40%. There's no way that someone can even survive on that rent and plus the lights and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what's really hard about that, is really sticking to that 60%.
Mm-hmm.
And then I mean the state came up and they were dinging us because they seen some res dogs walking by, and they said, "Oh, that's not right. You shouldn't have these dogs." They didn't call them res dogs, like that's our term. Having all these dogs running around here, and then we're like,
it's got nothing to do with the project.
Right.
right.
It's got nothing to do with the project.
What they said was curb appeal.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, it's 100% leased up,
Yeah. Right.
So,
We're not worried about that.
and and honestly, res dogs know the vehicles that capture them. So as soon as
They know where to run, when to run. But I will say, if you drive around Macy, it's the nicest neighborhood to this day, 18 years later.
Yeah, wow.
It still is.
Hmm.
The people up there do tend to take care of their yards. It's nice. They're nice homes.
yeah, they
And have they been privatized now that they're through their 15-year partnership period?
Working on it right
we
now.
are.
Yeah.
You and I are going to be working at
I-
privatization. Well, the problem
I-
right now is finding the.
I wrote up a plan for the council to
So
look at.
that
so-
comes back to
Yeah.
the issue where we built it on trust land,
Right.
and now we're going to turn the homes over. So then everybody that's there currently is going to get a lease, 50-year, 100-year lease on that little piece of property that goes along with that house. We don't have anything that doesn't give us points for the leases. I don't know why we're worried about it, honestly. You have a house on this piece of property that's 40 acres. Nobody cares other than us anyway. We don't care. The state's not going to regulate it.
Mm-hmm.
Federal government doesn't care. So I got an argument with our realty people. Like, why do we care? We're not going to take the house away from them. We're going to lease it to them for 100 years for $1. Give them the house and say it's a 50 by 100 lot located within this, and walk away.
Yeah. I mean, there's no money coming in to take care of those homes.
No.
They need to be
Privatized.
privatized.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
But I think that's part of us when we talk about sovereignty. That's our own sovereignty. What do we care?
Mm-hmm.
We don't. It's a lot that doesn't mean anything to anybody but us. Anybody but our realty department, for that matter. Doesn't matter to anybody. Not going to be recorded anywhere. So
Right. And that's the other thing is that once you're the homeowner, there is there are funding resources out there for, like USDA 504 program
yeah,
that can come in, or they can go under the they can go under the 504 program and get a loan and start rehabbing or getting a furnace and so forth, if that's down the line.
Yeah.
So
How do you manage if a tenant no longer income qualifies?
normally with that situation, especially with low-income housing tax credits, once you're in, and then you just you every year you have to recertify, and that's how everything's kind of structured. Is once you're in, if you're at a 60%. But now, the income limits have raised again, so for most of the tribe, we really didn't have that many people that were considered over income.
but once they get to that point, then they're paying full lease up.
So, Melissa, as we think about you teaching those other tribes that are listening in to, Omaha Tribe of Nebraska, talking about various project elements and development. You talked about Heritage Hills. We learned a lot. Talked about kind of Macy Hills, and project still looks good even to today. What's the most important thing that you can transfer to somebody just watching this video, this webinar, that they really need to know about?
I have something that I'll say on that.
Okay.
They got to be. Her first thing was, when we do a project, do site selection.
Yep.
We intentionally chose to go on fee land
Okay.
with Page-2 because it's transferable.
Mm-hmm.
When you go on trust land, we run into the same problem that we're talking about. Who cares but the tribe? But when they go to the bank, if they just go to a regular bank, they're not going to get a loan because the bank has nothing to encumber. The house is not movable
Right.
necessarily, so they're not going to
Yep.
encumber that. They don't want to deal with it. It's not a trailer. So your site selection, you have to think forward. Are we going to be able to help these people in the future in 20 years, in 30 years, 40 years, to maintain their homes with either a loan, and maybe we have to think outside the box on that.
yeah.
With the fee land, if we put a home ownership home on that fee land, the bank will give them money in 20 years. The bank will
Yeah.
give them money in 30 years. Not
Yeah.
saying that's the way to go. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that's a consideration when you do your site selection. It's a
Yeah.
big consideration.
You got to be looking at the mix of financing. With the USDA, you're okay being on trust land because they will do a loan, against a leasehold interest.
hmm
Now that assumes the tribe has enacted what's called typically a real property ordinance, but they got all that work done. But if you're looking at a straight tax credit deal, no, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And anytime, if you're thinking long terms in terms of property management and asset management, it's nice to have a mix of financing that would let you bring something else on in terms of a subsidy that would have to be subordinate, right, to all that financing. But again, you can run into that trust land issue down the road. So if you can do fee land, if you've got enough fee land, I think that's always going to be easier. And sometimes, like a case of our fee land, we don't have to pay any taxes on it, but that's another issue that could come up, you got to think about.
Yep.
Yeah. Working with the BIA and trying to get a TSR, title status report, that's a good year,
Yeah.
It's
maybe longer.
Mm-hmm.
and it may be worse right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the BIA's never been my favorite agency to do any work with, so.
Well, it seems like here we are. I mean, it's not been, you're not the biggest fan of Interior and other federal programs, and the HASDA, who still doesn't work for us, generally right now. And if it takes us a year to get something that you can get in the county, just going down the street and getting it in a week or two. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but probably not too much. Here we are at that intersection where this administration says you want to be sovereign. Now, here you are, be sovereign.
Go be sovereign.
Yeah,
Right.
So is this time right now as risky and as dangerous as we're making it out to be, or is it really, put on our pants and let's go be sovereign?
So I think it goes back to, you're talking about the casino tribes and the tribes with money.
Are you guys a casino tribe?
We do have a casino. It's not necessarily profitable enough to support us.
Mm-hmm.
It's jobs.
It's just jobs.
Yeah. Well, that's important.
But it is important. That
Yeah.
is important.
But yeah.
But if let's say our federal dollars went away tomorrow, we'd be in trouble.
Yeah.
We can go north to Winnebago. HCI's up there. HCI's created enough business and jobs and whatnot. They would hurt, but they would survive. I'm not 100% sure we would survive without federal dollars.
Mm.
And that's a scary thought. So we have to start thinking outside the box, and we're not going after federal dollars. We're not going after, the sovereignty becomes us creating our own businesses that can support, and we're a ways away from that. We realize that. But we've got to get our people geared towards supporting ourselves, because when we wave the word sovereignty around, are we? Are we? When we're looking at the federal government with our hand out, we're probably not, because then we got to jump through their hoops,
Right.
and that goes against everything in my mind what sovereignty really is.
Well, I've said it, and I heard it said before. If you ask 1,000 people how to define sovereignty, you're going to get 1,200, correct responses to that question. Do you have a pre-existing relationship with lenders?
We have. We have pre-existing, and we've been working for 30 years with the Federal Home Loan Bank, and with the local banks, and with USDA. And then at the end of the day, we just ask them, what's your templates, and what are you looking for? With the financing, what happened to me was it was such a great project that once someone found out, they would say, hey, we have some money, that could help with down payment assistance. So it turns out that once you have a very successful project and it's ready to go, it's not hard to find people to step in and also want to provide some kind of housing assistance.
What is your recommendation for folks who may not have had success quite yet? How can they cultivate new relationships with lenders?
We try to go to every training that's available. The last one we went to was Res, and we were able to find, like, for instance, we were able to even talk with someone that worked with John Deere. He sat at our table, and I said, we were trying to get, for us, we wanted to get John Deere to bring in someone to help us to do mechanics on John Deere tractors on our reservation. So we wanted our children to learn how to do that so they would be eligible for farm labor housing to work on John Deere tractors.
Yeah. I think you might want to look at what banking institutions your tribe might have a history with, right? And see if, they might be interested. It's a possibility for them to score, per the CRA, if that's still relevant. When we first got our program started, there was an organization in Omaha called Omaha 100, and their charge was to make 100 non-conforming home loans, which means that they couldn't sell them off to the secondary markets like banks do. They would have to hold those loans in-house for at least a year, and if they performed well, then they, of course, could sell them off. Other banks have done things like that to encourage home ownership and to be able to serve people that they haven't historically served. So I think, looking at who your tribe might be banking with, talking with them, seeing what their programs are, and, don't be shy. In some sense, you've got something to sell, right? Because you're offering a bank an opportunity to make loans to people that they have historically, not. And depending on, what's going on with them, they might be very interested in that.
You talked about the future, and when you say future, I think youth. You think about training our people up, I think workforce development. Tell me a little bit about your workforce development and youth. Like, how do you look at that, and what kind of programs and planning do you have in place for workforce development and youth?
We as a tribe don't have much, but I'm going to give a little credit to our school. They have a career academy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Last year they graduated 12 certified CNAs, graduated from high school, work ready. They could go into a nursing home or wherever and be a certified nurse's assistant.
They have a beautiful new school.
It is.
Reservation.
It is.
It's just gorgeous.
And how
And
many tribal members are you?
6,000 each.
Yeah. Okay.
And I believe the school's 600, the Macy School, Omaha Nation Schools, I believe is about 600
Okay.
kids, K through 12. They looked at it and they were getting graduating classes of 24, 25, 26, whatever it would happen to be, with 2 or 3 that were going to college. Where's our glitch here? And they realized that most of them were ready to just go into the workforce. Okay, let's make them workforce ready.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got carpentry classes within there. They've got automotive classes within there. They've got culinary arts. They've got CNAs. CNA is really successful.
Did you say the auto body part?
The auto body. I mean, they got
Mechanical, yeah.
they got a shop that I would love to have.
Mm.
A wood shop and an auto shop that I would love. Personally, I would love to have.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's our future. Is that we're for 30 years. When I got out of school, you need to go to college. I've employed a lot of people with bachelor's of arts degrees that are carpenters, that are plumbers. They wasted 4 years of their time, 4 years of their parents' dollars or the federal government's dollars doing that. When some counselor didn't sit down when they were a freshman and identify that he's probably better off going into the trades
Mm-hmm.
than he is going into these degree to get a degree that
Right.
becomes useless.
A certificate's really important, and you can do very well with a certificate.
Yep. And some people are geared towards college.
Yeah, right.
And some people take that bachelor's of arts in history and make a good living out of it.
Yeah.
Most don't.
Right.
So historically, some counselor needs to sit down with those kids at a young age and say, you really look like you probably belong in the construction trades.
Yeah.
Let's steer you towards that.
Which is really kind of a good way to segue into this next important question, which is you're talking about youth and their future. What is your future? Talk to me about the plans for your organizational future, the tribe's future. What does that look like?
Um,
I mean, really uncertain times right now,
I-
very challenging times. What does the future look like?
I just keep breathing.
Yep.
I'm only kidding. I mean, our future really looks like trying to become sovereign and work towards other. I mean, gosh, it's so great when we get a big project, and it's so great to see development, homeowners, the towns.
So, to me, and I got a roadmap in my mind. I can't put it on paper just yet. Of I'm going to go back to making housing irrelevant. I want everybody to own their own home.
Mm-hmm.
I want everybody to have a job that can pay for that home. If that job's on our reservation, or if it's close enough to the reservation that they can just commute, whatever. Right now, we don't have that. We've got 45% unemployment. You know,
You got to correct yourself on that. It may be 45%, but that's unemployment. But the ones that are not looking do not get counted.
right, and
So-
it probably pushes up into the 60% range.
Right. So I guess what we see is how to make this easier, and then finding Tom and I really keep talking about this, is putting together a plan, that the tribes can take a look at and purchase and say, okay, this is your steps. So just give them the entire plan on how to do the development. Number one, look for your site selection. Number two, well, first of all, get an accountant, get your attorney in line, and then the site selection. Immediately do the environmental, so there's nothing wrong with that site selection. And then, for me, I would say set aside $100,000. Start with that, and then now these grants that are coming out, they want shovel ready. They do not want to wait your 2, 3, 5 years before you take this money and put it in your account.
You guys have an inventory of shovel-ready projects?
Well, we're working on up the hill, so that's going to
Okay.
be shovel ready, and then we have been contacted, in regards to energy.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've been contacted about putting solar panels on it. So I'm going to be, me and you are Tom. Me and you are we could be working on that grant this week. Okay, we're shovel ready. We're shovel ready on that one because of the fact that we had to get new roofs on all the houses, Kenny.
But I think we're going to go back to the raised planning grant that we got. That creates 15 different projects,
Yeah.
shovel-ready projects next year.
Yeah.
Right.
And you springboard those into capital fund projects.
It seems like there was a big focus in the previous administration when we're starting to think about infrastructure and
Which is what
energy
RAISE is.
transition,
Yeah.
et cetera. It would seem to me that kind of going back to the indigenous basics, orientation, insulation, so you don't need as much energy, whether it's green, clean, or something else.
Right.
We got
That,
some of that
some
money.
pretty basic
Yeah.
elements of
Yeah.
the Omaha and its migration and origination of face the teepee this way. The sun rises in the east, it sets in the west. And
Yeah.
when the northern wind comes in the winter, it comes this way. Those kinds of basic things that
That's true.
that when we start thinking about allowing others to come into our communities, and I mean others like non-Indian architects and designers and planners and whatnot, they're not even thinking the way that our previous generation would know.
Right.
About where to build and how to build, and then it's maybe less emphasis on the kind of energy that our planet somehow was really and found itself in this really interesting debate about this kind of energy versus the other kind of energy. What if we used a lot less energy of no matter what kind it is? just in terms of energy efficiency,
Yeah.
sustainable design, orientation, etc., insulation.
We did do some work. As everybody knows, the Biden administration just put a lot of green money out there. So we were part of a consortium that was headed up by Pete Upton, right, with Native 360, and we did get an allocation of some $5 million to green up the tribe's buildings, do solar roofing. I just did do a priority list recently for the CCIA and what we hope to accomplish over the next 18 months. So, we're going to be doing some of that, and hopefully there's going to be some operations money. There is about $500,000 there that's could be set aside for operations. Presumably, though, that money will have to go out pro rata, with the placement of the capital. But as I was telling them just this last week, we need a lot of engineering work on the front end, right? I mean, we put together these concepts, we set them in, and well, now they need to be better defined. We need some real cost estimates, not guesstimates, and so we're in the process of doing that. And I don't think you could say, there wasn't a lot of attention paid to cultural aspects when we put together that proposal, and we merely participated in the larger one. But there was a lot of interest in energy conservation and community impact, and the highest priority was to put solar roofing on all of the housing authorities' units. That was the top priority. So.
Yeah, if we would put equally as much money into the installation orientation, those kinds of things, maybe we'd end up at the same place in terms of the actual economics and the comfort of those kind of units, because it seems like oftentimes, I'm not saying you, but us in Indian country, we pay less attention to that than the previous generations maybe did in terms of like our Chaco Canyon, our Mesa Verde kind of units today. They're not the cave-like structures. They're not the big, massive stone with the orientation. We talked a lot about res dogs. We've talked about price of ingredients of an Indian taco. We've talked about, it's our sovereignty. Tom, what would Clyde Tyndall Jr. encourage you to do?
Well, I had a good conversation with Clyde a couple weeks before he passed.
Okay.
I think Clyde would encourage me to keep working and make sure I have balance in my life. When I retired, I didn't do anything for a couple years, and then Melissa got me involved in this. But I think Clyde would encourage me to continue to do meaningful things and to not work all the time like we did back when, 30 years ago, and to have balance in my life and to have fun. I think that's what Clyde would tell me.
Yeah. He would say, think outside the box.
Yeah.
Just think outside the box.
I think that's a recurring theme, the think outside the box thing.
Kenny, what would Clyde Tyndall Jr. think about the current state of affairs? I mean, the intersection that we're in right now.
I think he'd be upset, but he would want us to figure out ways to work through it. What do we got to do to get around this bad decision? What do we got to do to get around this lack of funding from this? Where do we go to find other sources of funding? Just work around it.
Yeah.
And I think we've been around long enough that we still have that same mindset. We're going to do that, and if it's private funding sources or whoever, whatever, we don't care. We're going to go and we're going to explore those avenues and see if it's something that'll work for us, and just keep going ahead.
Melissa, finally to you. What would Clyde Tyndall Jr., the Godfather, what would he tell young people? And what words would he give young people?
He was all about education.
Yeah.
He absolutely was about education.
Okay.
He would come up with the craziest things, and I remember him calling me years back, and he says, we got to become programmers. Our world's going into the computer phase, and we need to start being programmers to do this. And I'm like, and he's, 60 years old at that time? And I'm like, God, nobody wants to go back to school. But I should.
But you should.
Yeah.
But I think
Oh my
I'm
God.
gonna speak for her and I'll speak for myself. I don't know what retirement looks like
Yeah.
Yeah.
in my future, or I can't envision myself being retired. So that puts me on just keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
I was teasing around earlier that I'm probably walking around at 80 years old with a cane telling people what to do.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
And I don't envision myself doing anything different ever.
You don't get the sense that it's a power move, or if it's adding to your 401k or anything like that. We've got to get stuff done, and in order to do it, somebody's got to do it, and you're the guy to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the sense I hear.
It feels that way a lot.
Yeah.
And it's not about power.
Yeah, right.
It's not. Our people need things, and if I'm the person that can do that for them, I'll do that.
Yeah, right.
And that's how you do that.
Right.
And how do I instill that into our younger? I've said for years, if somebody wants to get in my pickup and ride around with me all day long, I'll show you what I do. I'll give it to you. Haven't found that person yet.
Yeah, so you answer your own question. I mean, it's a great question to end this segment on. How do you do that?
That is a good question, and I'm hoping that out of this career academy, I find that kid.
Okay.
And I put him in my pickup and you ride around, and I'll freely give it all the knowledge that I have. You can have it. It's yours. Because it belongs to the tribe. I learned it from the tribe, so I'm going to give it back to the tribe.
I wanted to inject just real quickly with everybody, including my husband, Kenny, and Tom, is that, years back, we worked, I think all of us worked 7 days a week. And I think now that we're getting a little bit older, it doesn't bother me to tell my boss or tell anybody else to say, I'm taking a week off. I'm going to go see my grandbabies, or him, I'm going to go fishing. Or him, I'm going to go on a cruise with my 20 grandkids
I did that.
and chase them around. And so it is, that before we were so gung-ho, it wouldn't stop, it doesn't stop us from calling each other on a weekend or what have you, but it's still that, these grandchildren are looking to us, and that's the other thing, is that now we can say, I'm on vacation. We stop. So before we never did.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for coming to Albuquerque and spending time with us, and please come back at any point in time. And we really enjoyed this conversation, this communication. Thank you.
Thank you,
Well, thank
Roger.
you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.